this is soiledplant and welcome back to my channel. This week's video is all about my experiments. I want to show you kind of what I'm doing right now, what my updates are. I'm excluding most propagations. I'm only talking about the things that either I'm propagating differently or just kind of seeing what happens. A couple of new purchases in here. I'm going to start with what I think is the riskiest experiment on here, the one that I've paid the most for up front, and the thing that I kind of need to succeed if I'm going to make that money worth it. And that is my low-variegation monstera albo. I made a whole video about it where I chopped it all up to propagate it and hopefully encourage more variegation. This here is the base of the plant. This is the leaf that I left on it. It's got a couple of little brown tips and things. It's not the happiest plant in the world, I get it. This leaf here is the newest one on this plant, and even though the variegation isn't quite as bright as it is on this corner right here, there is more of it. So I'm very encouraged, and I know we're getting on winter, so I'm not expecting a ton of like miracles here, but you can see the variegation down here is starting to show through. So I've got my flashlight here. I'm going to try not to blind you. You can definitely see that white variegation on the back side. Can you see it? Can you see it? So it's definitely hard to see, but you're just going to have to trust me that there is at least a small amount of variegation on basically this whole half of the leaf over here. This half over here is just straight up green. There is nothing going on, but this side has a little speckled variegation throughout. So that's encouraging. At least it's a little bit better than the leaf I started with. And I'll show you all of the rest of the leaves that I cut off the plant and the status of those. Of course, I've got them bundled up in my trusty pickle jar. The roots are going crazy. It's super happy. The next step is definitely to plant these up, and I do intend to plant these up at least so I can keep track of them as separate leaves and see how they're doing, and just so it's not growing in water anymore. But one of these is giving me a new leaf. Look at that. The last one that came out, I couldn't tell that there's variegation on it until it came all the way out. This one is no different, so I have a feeling it's going to be another one that's a little bit lower in variegation. That's all right, I will make do. So the plant that it's coming off of is this leaf right here, which only has, a small amount of variegation down here. So I'm not expecting the world of this new one, but I will say every single plant in here has roots, and there are more leaves coming up. I see 3 smaller ones aside from the one that's unfurling. So I definitely need to get these potted up, and I plan to do that this upcoming weekend when I have a little bit of time. Sunday is going to be all about my plants. The next experiments I'd like to talk about are all of my alocasia bulbs, which are known as corms. And I'll show you what one of those looks like before I show you kind of what I've done here. But when you look into the soil of the plant, if it's growing and you're repotting it, you will find a bunch of these things in the soil. They are little tiny bulb things if you've ever planted tulips or something like that. It's the same kind of concept, but they are known as corms, and these are basically seedlings for new plants. I was inspired to do these experiments because I watched Emma with Good Growing about how she decided to sort of grow the corms bulbs into actual plants, and the one that she said worked best was the shadow puddle method, and I'll show you that. So this is not the most elegant solution in the world, but all you do is you have a dish. This is a Tupperware container that I put a lid on and like rest it gently on there so it gets a little bit of airflow and it doesn't get all moldy. But I do have it in a Tupperware container, and you put enough water in there so that it covers about half to maybe 2/3 of your corm, and then you start getting plants and it starts rooting and all of that. And I will show you as much as I can. So you can see, I'm turning it so you're not getting like the perfect level, but that's about where I have it at. And you can see at the edge over there is one that's growing. And I'll pull that out just so you could check it out. And that is it right there with its little roots and its little plant starting to grow. And this is the first one from that batch that actually is starting to grow a leaf. But I do have several in here that are rooted. There are 3 that are not, but they're definitely still alive. One way I can tell if they're still alive is I kind of go through and squish them, and see if they're squishy. If they're not squishy, then they are still active. They are not dead yet. And then I put a little sign in there just to make sure I knew exactly what was in here. But these are all my Alocasia mandalay bulbs from when I replanted that in order to give it new soil. And then I just put the lid back on top. And this is my little Tupperware container filled with my Alocasia Frydek bulbs, corms. I'm going to keep calling them both because honestly, whenever I look at them, I see bulbs, but I know they're called corms. Just something I have to remember. But this is the first one that gave me an actual plant, and it's got a little leaf on the very edge over here. It's not the best looking leaf in the world, but it's a leaf. And the entire plant looks about like that. You can see the little wet roots. With this method, one thing that I would caution you is do not let this dry out. I've done that a handful of times, and the roots are so delicate and thin that they will stick to the bottom, and when you refill it with water, it doesn't automatically loosen up, and so you're more likely to rip roots, so just be careful about that. Yeah, I do double check my little thing, my little corms, and this one's got a teeny tiny little root. It's moving, it's grooving. I've got this one right here that is starting to do like the little plant, and that has a cat hair on it. Lovely, but it's got a plant starting to grow. I think about once it starts unfurling a leaf like this, I think once the leaf is completely open, or maybe, you know, this will be a project I do this weekend also, but about when it gets to this point where there's an actual leaf like unfurling is about when I would plant it up. So that is my personal rule for when to go from the shallow dish method into an actual pot, whether it's leca, soil, whatever is your soil medium of choice. I would do it after the leaf has already come out, but that is my Alocasia Frydek. So the other method that she tried that she wasn't a big fan of, but I still wanted to try, was the moss propagation. And so this one, I wrote on the little cup that this is my dragon scales. And I will say, I think these kind of grow a little slower. I don't know how well you're going to be able to see these because they look like the same color as the moss. You can see a nice healthy root there, and I'm afraid to pull these out. Oh, here we go. I pulled this one out because it doesn't have any roots, and it's still nice and solid, but it hasn't produced any roots yet. What I do try with this method is I do try to cover this like almost 3/4 of the way, so that it's like being wrapped around so that it has a little bit more moisture, but because it's moss, it has more air. So the obvious problem with this is that it dries out a lot easier and it's harder to keep it moist. One thing I do is I use my orchid spray that I actually use on my Hoyas and just kind of give it a little spritz every once in a while, not super often, maybe like once a month. And that helps to keep it moist, but I also just spray it with water also, which I have a bottle I reuse to keep that also on the nice moist side, but I try not to keep it too moist because that's how you get rot and I keep it about the same water content that I do for any of my propagations. Same thing with this. So these are actually half of the ones that I took out of my dragon scale. I do in fact have a second one, which is, ooh, I just got water all down my pants. Exciting. Yes, but this one is basically the same situation, just a couple of corms in my moss right here. You know, nothing exciting to see. I will say that having it in moss makes it a little bit harder because you can't tell if they're roots or not. You can still squeeze them the same way, and it's a little bit harder to tell whether or not they're rooting or not, and you don't know if like pulling on them or tugging on them is going to rip the roots out. So I don't really like that aspect. I haven't had to deal with that yet, but I can see that being an issue. And the last one is actually my Alocasia Silver Dragon. And look at how wonderful this one's doing in its little moss container here. This one is a little on the moist side. And look at those lovely little cute leaves. They don't quite look like a silver dragon yet. They definitely have the shape, but they don't have that kind of silver quality to them yet. They definitely like to sparkle in the light, but they're not quite at that silver point yet. The only difference between this one and the other ones is I feel like I've kept this one a little more on the moist side than the other ones. I'm not 100% sure on that. This is not the most scientific experiment you've ever seen, but it is doing lovely. And my other one on this other one over here is also putting out a little leaf. Do you see that little baby leaf? How cute is this little baby leaf? So this is more of a rare situation where all 4 of the corms that I put in here all produce leaves in record time, faster than any of the other methods I showed. So I don't honestly know if this is just because the silver dragon just is amazing at this. I'm not sure, but it definitely just like, this is the superstar, and I could not tell you why. I would recommend, if you have a silver dragon, to try this method and maybe keep the moss a little bit on the wet side. Who knows? That's what happened to work for me in this instance, but they look amazing, so no complaints on my end. All right, now on to the new experiments. These are 2 that I purchased this last week, and I'll show you kind of what's going on here. I'll start with this crazy one. This lovely contraption right here is exactly how I purchased it, and this is a little node that I bought on Facebook Marketplace from somebody local, and this has perlite in there, so hopefully I can get that in there so you can see it a little bit better. But that is a node. You see that teeny tiny little leaf? That teeny tiny little leaf on this side right here. Don't mind me, it's a little on the dry side. But that right there is actually a philodendron serpens. There's a person on Facebook who was getting rid of some plants for the winter, and I quickly snatched it up because philodendron serpens get a little pricey. And I'll show you a picture of what a mature one looks like, just so you get an idea of what I'm going for. And I love those little hairy stems. From the story that she told me, she had a big, beautiful plant and it ended up dying back and just rapidly deteriorating down to this little stump. And she said it's been consistent and alive and is growing that little leaf and like shows signs of growth, but it stressed her out to the point where she just wanted to get it out of the house and maybe start all over again with the serpens. But she could not stand to look at this anymore. To which point I came in and said, yes, I will pay that $15 and I will experiment and see if this thing grows. I do know for a fact that at this point it does not have roots, but I did look at it. I did kind of poke and prod at it, and it is still alive. You can tell it just kind of needs that patience and that TLC. I definitely want to give this thing the best shot at life. I'd love to have this grow into an actual plant and be able to like grow a philodendron serpens from a little node. That would be awesome. So I actually have this in my IKEA greenhouse, even though it's kind of in a little makeshift greenhouse as it is. But I figure that would be the best spot to have some light and see how it does. This last one I'm actually really excited about. And I'm going to actually take this one out of the moss to show you because it doesn't have roots yet, not quite. It does have just a ton of little leaves on it. I would be shocked, like actually shocked if you could tell me what this is just by looking at this stump, my little chonk here. That would be impossible. But here, let me give you a hint at this little tiny baby leaf right here. Yeah, you can tell that from that little leaf that this is, you can tell from that tiny little leaf that it's at least a heart-shaped philodendron, right? This is a node for an El Choco Red. I spent a pretty penny for a wet stick. This is true, but because of the number of nodes on it, because of there already being some growth on it, I felt really good about this plant and its chance of survivability. So I make sure to spray it and keep it a little on the moist side. I'm trying not to drown this one because honestly it's on the road to being a full plant already, and all I need to do is just kind of not get in the way. And this one I also have in my IKEA greenhouse so that it gets really good light and it has that higher humidity to kind of help it come along. And it's going to do great, and I cannot wait for this to become a full plant. With all the little nodes on this thing, its chances of survival are like way up there. And I do think that this is kind of fun, especially over the winter, to kind of have like something to focus on that can grow, something that you can build on so that by the time spring rolls around, like everything is ready to go and you're super excited. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Comment down below what kind of experiments are you working on. Don't forget to subscribe. I post content on Thursdays, and follow my Instagram. I never talk about my Instagram. I don't post there like a ton but if you're into somebody who will occasionally talk about their plants on a social media platform, that is the one I use the most. And I thank you so much for watching this video, especially all the way to the end. I really appreciate you guys, and I will catch you next time. Bye!